A customer asked if the aisle that listens had started whispering again. He said it the same way someone might ask if the soda machine was still out of order, casual, mildly inconvenienced, as if the answer might determine whether he'd bother going down that side of the store. I was halfway through restocking the instant noodles when he asked, crouched with a cardboard box open at my feet, the sharp smell of dehydrated broth and plastic wrap rising into the stale night air. The refrigeration units hummed behind me, one of them stuttering every few seconds like it couldn't decide whether to stay alive. I looked up. The what? I said. The man stood near the counter, one hand resting on a basket he hadn't filled. Mid-30s, maybe. Office clothes loosened at the collar, tie half pulled. He didn't look like he was joking. The aisle that listens, he repeated, patient. Back there. He gestured vaguely toward the rear of the store. With the canned goods. It does that sometimes, right? Starts whispering. I stared at him for a second too long. Sorry, I said finally. I just started here. He nodded, like that explained everything. Ah, night shift. Yeah, that's when it's worst, he said. Not ominous, just matter of fact. You'll hear it more clearly when it's quiet. A small, mechanical click sounded from one of the fridges. The lights flickered, dimming just enough to make the edges of the shelves blur. I followed his earlier gesture toward the back. The store wasn't big, 3 main aisles, all narrow, with shelving that rose just above eye level. The far aisle, the one he'd pointed at, sat under a strip light that buzzed faintly. I'd noticed it earlier because the light over it was slightly dimmer than the others, a thin gray wash instead of white. Aisle 3, I asked. That's the one, he said. Has it been whispering tonight? No, I said. I mean, no one told me anything about that. Huh. He seemed almost disappointed. He shifted his weight, basket creaking. Maybe it stopped again. Stopped what? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice like we were discussing something fragile. It repeats things, he said. Not right away. A few seconds later. Like an echo, but wrong. I felt a small, involuntary tightness in my chest. Probably just the acoustics, I said. The shelves, the metal. Sure, he said easily. At first, something about the way he said it made me glance back toward aisle 3 again. The strip light above it flickered once, briefly dimming further before returning to its usual weak glow. You'll hear it, he added. Everyone does eventually. He set his basket on the counter, finally committing to a purchase, 2 cans of coffee, a pack of cigarettes. As I rang him up, he watched me with a kind of detached curiosity, like he was waiting for something. Has anyone complained? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Oh, yeah, he said. But not in a serious way. It's just the aisle. Sometimes it acts up. Acts up how? He shrugged. Depends. Sometimes it just repeats you. Sometimes it says things you didn't say. I stopped scanning for a moment. That doesn't make sense. He smiled faintly. No, it doesn't. The receipt printer whirred to life, spitting out paper with a soft mechanical chatter. The sound filled the small space between us, loud in the otherwise empty store. First night? He asked. Second. Then you're right on schedule, he said. I handed him his change. Our fingers didn't touch, but for a moment it felt like the air between us had thickened, like the store was holding its breath. Try not to talk too much back there, he added, almost as an afterthought. It remembers. Before I could ask what he meant, he picked up his things and left, the automatic doors sliding open with a soft hydraulic sigh. The bell above them chimed once, sharp and clean. Then he was gone. The store settled into silence again, the kind that isn't really silent at all, just layered with small, constant sounds. The hum of refrigeration, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights, the occasional tick from somewhere in the ceiling. I stood behind the counter for a while after he left, staring at aisle 3. It looked like any other aisle. Narrow, overcrowded, rows of canned vegetables, soups, boxed pasta, cheap sauces stacked in imperfect lines. The floor tiles there were slightly darker, worn from foot traffic. Normal. I let out a slow breath and shook my head, trying to shake off the unease. Acoustics, I muttered under my breath. Just acoustics. My own voice sounded flat in the empty store. I went back to restocking. It must have been 20 minutes later when I heard it the first time. I was in aisle 1, near the front, adjusting a row of bottled tea that refused to stay aligned. My back was to the rest of the store. Just acoustics, I said again, quieter this time, more to myself than anything. A beat of silence followed. Then, from somewhere behind me, faint, almost indistinguishable from the hum of the lights, I heard acoustics. I froze. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even clear. Just a suggestion of a word, stretched thin, like it had been pulled through something narrow. I turned slowly. The store was empty. Aisle 2, then aisle 3, still, unchanged. My heartbeat picked up, loud enough that I could hear it in my ears. I waited. Nothing. You're tired, I whispered, trying to keep my voice even. A few seconds passed. Then, softer than before. Tired. The word came from the direction of aisle 3. I felt something cold slide down my spine. Hello, I called, louder now. The word seemed to vanish as soon as it left my mouth, swallowed by the store. No response. I stepped out of aisle 1, moving slowly toward the center of the store. The overhead lights flickered again, a quick stutter that made the shadows between the shelves deepen and contract. Aisle 3, I said, forcing a small, shaky laugh. Very funny. Silence. Then, after a delay that felt just a fraction too long. Very funny. The voice was mine, but it wasn't right. The pitch was slightly off, the cadence uneven, like someone had tried to mimic the way I spoke but hadn't quite gotten it. The last word dragged a little longer than it should have. I stopped walking. The air felt heavier near the back, like it was thicker there, harder to move through. Okay, I said. That's enough. Enough. Closer now. I swallowed. Stop it. Stop it. The second repetition overlapped the first, slightly out of sync, like two recordings playing over each other but misaligned by a fraction of a second. My skin prickled. Who's there? I demanded. There was a longer pause this time. For a moment, I thought it had stopped. Then, from deep within aisle 3, something rustled, a soft shifting of packaging, the crinkle of plastic against cardboard. There. Not. Who's there? Just the last word. And not in my voice. This one was thinner. Higher. Strained. I took a step back. The shelves in aisle 3 seemed darker than before, the dim light above casting uneven shadows that pooled between the products. You're imagining it, I said quickly, more to fill the silence than out of conviction. Imagining it. The mimicry was improving. The rhythm was closer now. The tone less distorted. I backed away another step. I'm not going back there, I said. Silence. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then, not going back there. Perfect. Exactly the way I'd said it. Same emphasis. Same breath at the end. My throat tightened. The man's words came back to me. It remembers. I turned and walked quickly back to the counter, putting distance between myself and aisle 3. The bell above the door remained silent. No one came in. I stayed behind the counter, hands resting on the edge, trying to steady my breathing. Minutes passed. Nothing else happened. Around midnight, I convinced myself I'd overreacted. Fatigue, I told myself. Suggestion. The customer had planted the idea, and my brain had run with it. The store looked normal again. The lights had stopped flickering. The hum of the refrigerators was steady. Aisle 3 sat quiet and dim, just another stretch of shelving. I even laughed once, softly, at how tense I'd been. Get a grip, I muttered. Get a grip. The words came immediately this time. No delay. I flinched so hard my elbow knocked into the counter. The voice was mine, but closer. Not from the back of the store. From somewhere just beyond the end of aisle 2. I stared at the opening. The darkness between the shelves seemed deeper than it should have been. You don't exist, I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to control it. A pause. Then, gently, you don't exist. Not mocking. Not distorted. Just, repeated. As if the aisle was trying out the words, testing them. I felt a strange, irrational urge to respond, to correct it. That's not what I meant, I said before I could stop myself. Silence. Then, almost immediately, that's not what I meant. The cadence matched mine perfectly. I stepped back, shaking my head. No, I said. No, stop. No, stop. Two voices this time. Both mine. One slightly behind the other. The sound overlapped in a way that made my ears ring. I pressed my hands against the counter. Shut up, I whispered. Nothing. For a moment, it seemed to obey. Then, very softly, from deep within aisle 3. Shut up. But it wasn't alone. Another voice followed it. Different. Lower. Shut up. The second voice was rough, older. Male. Not mine. My stomach dropped. I hadn't heard that voice tonight. Which meant, it remembers every voice it has ever heard. The words slid into my mind with quiet certainty. I backed away from the counter, unable to look away from the aisle. Who was that? I asked, my voice barely audible. A long pause. Then, who was that? My voice. Then, after a beat. Who was that? The other voice. And then, layered beneath them both, something else, faint, almost lost in the hum of the store. A whisper I couldn't quite make out. I don't know how long I stood there. Time seemed to stretch, each second dragging longer than the last. The store remained empty. The door didn't open. The world outside might as well not have existed. Eventually, the silence became unbearable. I'm going to check, I said, though I wasn't sure who I was telling. Going to check. The aisle repeated, immediately. I swallowed and stepped out from behind the counter. Each step toward the back felt heavier than the last. The air grew colder as I approached aisle 3, the dim light above it flickering faintly again. I stopped at the entrance. Up close, the shelves seemed taller, the narrow space between them more confined. The products, cans, boxes, plastic-wrapped goods, were packed tightly, their labels facing outward in neat rows. Still, unmoving. Hello, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the narrow space. A beat. Then, hello, perfectly mirrored. But this time, it came from deeper inside. I stepped into the aisle. The light flickered again, casting brief shadows that shifted across the shelves. Hello. The word came again, softer, from behind me. I spun around. The aisle entrance was still there. Empty. When I turned back, something on the shelf to my right trembled, a small, almost imperceptible movement. A packet of instant soup crinkled softly, as if brushed by unseen fingers. I held my breath. The sound of breathing filled the space. Not mine. Slower. Measured. Close. Breathing. The aisle whispered. I hadn't said that. I took another step forward, drawn in despite myself. The shelves seemed to close in slightly, the space narrowing. You shouldn't be able to do that, I said. Shouldn't be able to do that. The mimicry was flawless now. I felt a strange pull, like the aisle was leaning toward me, attentive. Listening. I didn't say, breathing, I added. A pause. Then, softly, didn't say, breathing. And then, after a moment, breathing. The second voice wasn't mine. It was closer. Right behind my ear. I jerked forward, heart slamming against my ribs. No, I said, shaking my head. No, 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 no. The voices overlapped again. Then, something new. A whisper, clearer this time. A woman's voice. You left the light on. My blood went cold. I knew that voice. I hadn't heard it in years. Stop, I said, my voice breaking. Stop. But the aisle didn't stop. You left the light on, it repeated, more clearly. The memory hit me like a physical blow. A small apartment. Late night. Her voice from the bedroom, tired, amused. You left the light on. I hadn't thought about that in a long time. Hadn't said it out loud. How do you know that? I whispered. Silence. Then, how do you know that? And then, layered beneath it. You always forget. Her voice again. Perfect. Too perfect. I never said that here, I said, my throat tight. Never said that here. A pause. Then, never said that here. Her voice. The same words. The same tone. I felt something shift in the air around me, like the aisle was leaning closer, pressing in. You don't understand it, the whisper said. Not a repetition. Not something I'd said. You don't understand it, it repeated, in my voice. I took a step back. The aisle didn't feel like a place anymore. It felt like something aware. Something attentive. Something listening. You remember, it said. My voice. Her voice. The other voice. All layered together. You remember. The words echoed, overlapping, slightly out of sync. I'm leaving, I said, turning toward the entrance. I'm leaving. The aisle responded instantly. I took a step. You left the light on. The woman's voice again. Closer. Don't. I whispered. Don't. Please. Please. And then. Stay. That wasn't me. I stopped. The word hung in the air, heavy. Stay. It came again. Softer. Gentler. I felt something brush against my arm. I froze. There was nothing there. But the packaging beside me crinkled, shifting slightly. Stay. The aisle whispered again. My heart pounded. Another step forward, deeper into the aisle. I didn't remember deciding to move. Stay. The voices layered, overlapping. Mine. Hers. Others. A chorus of fragments. You always forget. Who was that? Very funny. Breathing. Stay. The words tangled together, a collage of voices and memories, some mine, some not. I could hear them all at once now, each slightly out of sync, like 100 recordings playing over each other. I took another step. The entrance seemed farther away now. Too far. You remember everything, I said, my voice barely audible. You remember everything. The aisle replied. Yes, it whispered. Not repeating. Answering. Yes. I felt my breath catch. You remember everything, it said again. My voice. Then hers. Then others. You remember everything. The words circled me, pressing in from all sides. Then you know, I said, my voice trembling. Then you know. A pause. The air seemed to tighten. Then, softly, I know. Not my voice. Not hers. Something else. Something that didn't quite fit any human tone. I stepped back, panic finally. Breaking through the haze. I'm going, I said. I'm going. I turned and walked quickly toward the entrance. The aisle seemed longer now, the shelves stretching, the light dimming further. Stay. The whisper followed me. Stay. Stay. The voices layered, urgent now. I didn't stop. I reached the end of the aisle and stepped out into the main store. The air felt different immediately, lighter, thinner. The hum of the refrigerators returned to normal. The lights steadied. Behind me, aisle 3 fell silent. Completely silent. I stood there, breathing hard, staring at the dark opening. Nothing moved. Nothing whispered. It was just an aisle again. Just shelves. Just products. I waited. Seconds passed. Then minutes. No sound came from the back. Slowly, cautiously, I walked back to the counter. The store felt normal again. Almost. I glanced at aisle 3 one last time. It remained still. Quiet. Attentive. Like it was waiting. Near dawn, the automatic doors slid open again. The same man from earlier stepped inside, looking as composed as before. He glanced at me, then toward the back. Did it start? He asked. I hesitated. Did it start? The whisper came from the back. Soft. Barely there. I looked at him. He didn't seem to hear it. Yes, I said finally. He nodded, unsurprised. Does it still do the thing? He asked. Where it repeats you. I swallowed. It does more than that, I said. More than that. The aisle echoed faintly. The man smiled slightly, like that confirmed something for him. Yeah, he said. It usually gets there eventually. He picked up a basket and started down aisle 1, as if nothing was wrong. As if nothing had changed. Behind him, the store remained quiet. But not empty. Never empty. Aisle 3 stood in the dim light, still and patient. Listening. Waiting for the next sound. The store's soda machine dispensed a can labeled, "Your last choice." It happened with a sound that didn't belong to any machine I'd ever heard before. Not the usual clunk of a can dropping into the tray. Not the hollow rattle of aluminum striking metal. This was softer. Slower. A deliberate, cushioned release, like something being handed over instead of dispensed. I hadn't pressed anything. I was standing a few feet away, near the end of the snack aisle, deciding whether I wanted something sweet or something salty. The fluorescent lights above me hummed at a steady, low frequency, the kind you don't notice until you stop moving. Then it fills your head. Then it feels like it's inside your teeth. Behind me, the soda machine whirred. A motor engaged. Something shifted. A single can rolled forward. And then that sound. Soft. Controlled, like it didn't want to wake anyone up. I turned slowly. The machine sat against the back wall, half in shadow. Its display was dim, most of the buttons unlit. The front panel, once bright with brand logos and color, looked faded, as if the light had been drained from it instead of turned off. The tray at the bottom held a single can. Condensation had already formed on its surface, beads of water collecting and sliding down in slow, uneven paths. I hadn't chosen anything. I stepped closer. The air back there was colder. Not the clean cold of refrigeration, but something damp and stale, like the inside of an unplugged freezer. The hum of the lights deepened slightly, or maybe it just felt that way. I crouched. The can rested in the tray, angled slightly forward, as if it had stopped just before tipping out completely. It wasn't any brand I recognized. The color was wrong, flat, matte gray, absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. There was a label, white text, simple and unadorned. Your last choice. All lowercase. No logo. No ingredients. No barcode. Just that. I stared at it for a long time. There was a faint ticking sound somewhere behind me. Or maybe above. Hard to tell in that store. The acoustics were strange, the shelves absorbing sound and then giving it back at odd angles. I started. My voice sounded too loud. I stopped. The machine didn't respond. Of course it didn't. I reached out, then hesitated just before touching the can. The condensation made it look colder than it should have been. The metal surface was slick, the droplets catching what little light there was and bending it slightly. I pulled my hand back. Okay, I said quietly. That's wrong. The word hung in the air. Wrong. It didn't echo. But it didn't disappear either. For a moment, it felt like the store had absorbed it, held onto it. I stood up. The rest of the store stretched out in front of me. 3 narrow aisles, a small counter near the entrance, a wall of refrigerators humming softly along the left side. No clerk. No other customers. I didn't remember seeing anyone when I walked in. The automatic doors were closed. The outside was dark, the glass reflecting the interior back at me in a faint, distorted way. I turned back to the machine. The can was still there. Waiting. I hadn't chosen anything. I don't want that, I said, more firmly this time. The machine remained silent, but something else shifted. A soft rustling from the snack aisle. I turned. A bag of chips near the end of the shelf tilted slightly, then slid forward just enough to fall. It hit the floor with a muted crinkle. I stared at it. Okay, I whispered. The store felt different now. Not louder. Not quieter. Just attentive. Like it had noticed me noticing it. I looked back at the soda machine. The can hadn't moved. But the tray beneath it seemed darker, the shadow deeper. I didn't pick anything, I said again. This time, the machine responded. Not with a voice. With a click. One of the buttons flickered weakly, then died again. Another followed. Then another. For a moment, the entire panel lit up, not with logos or brand names, but with blank, pale squares where the labels should have been. Then they went dark. The hum of the lights overhead faltered, dipping lower for a fraction of a second before returning. I took a step back. Fine, I said. I won't take it. The words felt heavier than they should have. Won't. Not can't. Won't. The distinction settled somewhere deep, uncomfortable. I turned away from the machine and walked toward the counter. The floor tiles felt slightly uneven under my feet, as if they had shifted while I wasn't looking. I reached the counter and leaned against it, trying to ground myself. Just leave, I muttered. Simple. Walk out. Forget it. The doors were right there. I pushed myself upright and took a step toward them. The hum of the lights dropped. Not off. Just lower. Thicker. The air pressed in slightly. I stopped. Another step. The refrigerators along the wall flickered, their interior lights dimming until the rows of drinks inside became indistinct shapes. Something behind me clicked. I didn't turn around. Another step toward the door. The automatic sensor didn't trigger. The doors remained closed. I frowned and waved my hand in front of it. Nothing. Come on, I said. The word sounded flat, unconvincing. Behind me, the soda machine whirred again. I felt it more than heard it, a subtle vibration through the floor. Something shifted inside the machine. A can rolled forward. Then another. Then another. I turned slowly. The tray now held 3 cans. All identical. All labeled the same. Your last choice. Condensation beaded on each one, thicker now, droplets forming faster than they should have. I hadn't pressed anything. I said I don't want it. I said, my voice tighter now. The machine went still. The lights above flickered once. The aisles seemed narrower. I blinked. They were the same, weren't they? I stepped back from the counter. The chips that had fallen earlier were gone. Not picked up. Not moved. Gone. The shelf they had fallen from looked fuller now, the gaps filled in as if nothing had been there to fall. I swallowed. That's not. I started. I didn't finish the sentence. Because I wasn't sure what it wasn't anymore. I walked slowly toward the middle aisle. The products felt wrong. Not visibly, but in the way they sat on the shelves. Too aligned. Too still. Like they were waiting. I reached out and picked up a chocolate bar. It felt lighter than it should have. I turned it over. No label. Just a blank wrapper. I put it back quickly. Okay. I said, louder now. I'm leaving. The word echoed in my head. Leaving. A choice. A direction. Final. The lights dimmed again. Behind me, the soda machine clicked. I turned. There was only one can in the tray now. The others were gone. The single remaining can sat centered, perfectly aligned. Waiting. I stared at it. I didn't choose that, I said. The store didn't respond. But something about the silence changed. It wasn't passive anymore. It felt expectant. I took a step toward the machine. Then another. My chest tightened with each movement, a slow pressure building. You don't get to decide that, I said. The words sounded small, uncertain. The machine hummed softly. Not mechanical. Almost patient. I stopped just in front of it. The can was close enough to touch. Condensation dripped from its surface, pooling slightly in the tray. I could hear it. A faint, irregular tapping as droplets hit metal. Tick, tick, tick. Each one too loud. I reached out again. My fingers hovered just above the can. This doesn't mean anything, I whispered. The words felt like they belonged to someone else. Like they'd already been said. I pulled my hand back. I can just leave, I said. The doors didn't open. The hum deepened. The air thickened again. Behind me, something shifted on the shelves. I didn't turn around. I can just not choose, I said. The silence stretched. Then, a soft sound. Not from the machine. From the store itself. A whisper of movement. Items sliding. Falling. Vanishing. I turned. The aisles were empty. Not completely. But enough. Sections of shelves where products had been were now bare, the metal backing exposed in dull, gray strips. The gaps spread slowly, like something erasing them piece by piece. What are you doing? I asked. The words felt pointless as soon as I said them. The store didn't answer. It didn't need to. It was showing me options disappearing. One by one, I turned back to the machine. The can remained unchanged, untouched. The only thing left that seemed offered. This isn't a choice, I said. The hum shifted. Not louder. Not quieter. Just different. Like a breath being held. I stared at the can. Your last choice. The words felt heavier now. Not descriptive. Declarative. A statement. Final. I reached out again. My fingers brushed the surface. Cold. Colder than it should have been. The condensation smeared under my touch, leaving streaks that quickly filled back in. I pulled my hand away. Nothing happened. No sound. No movement. But something had started. I could feel it. A subtle shift inside me. Like a door opening somewhere I couldn't see. I picked up the can. It was heavier than expected. Not by much. But enough. Enough to feel deliberate. The metal pressed cold against my palm, the chill seeping into my skin faster than it should have. The label faced me. Your last choice. I held it there, staring at the words. What happens if I don't open it? I asked quietly. The store was silent. The aisles behind me remained partially empty, the gaps unmoving now. Waiting. Like everything else, I turned the can slightly. No seam out of place. No indication it was anything other than a normal drink. Except for the label. Except for the weight. Except for the way it felt like it belonged in my hand. I tightened my grip. This doesn't count, I said. The words felt wrong as soon as I said them. Like I was trying to convince something that already knew better. The lights flickered again. The hum dropped. The air pressed in. The doors remained closed. I looked toward them. Then back at the can. My last choice. The phrase shifted in my mind. Not the last option. Not the only one left. The last one I would make. The implication settled slowly. Heavily. I swallowed. This is stupid, I whispered. The can was cold. Too cold. My fingers ached slightly from holding it. I could put it back. I could. I moved my hand toward the tray. It didn't feel right. The space where the can had been seemed closed. Like it wouldn't accept it again. I hesitated. The store waited. Everything waited. I brought the can closer. The tab at the top caught the light faintly. A simple motion. Pull. Open. Irreversible. I exhaled slowly. I'm choosing not to open it, I said. The words sounded firm. Final. A decision. The store reacted immediately. The lights dimmed sharply, plunging the aisles into deeper shadow. The hum dropped to a low, almost inaudible frequency. The air pressed in from all sides. The shelves behind me emptied further, entire sections vanishing in a single, silent sweep. The space around me shrank. The machine hummed louder. Insistent. I tightened my grip on the can. That's my choice, I said. The words trembled. The machine clicked. Once. Twice. The can in my hand vibrated slightly. Not enough to move. Just enough to be felt. A response. I stared at it. You don't get to decide that, I said again. The vibration stopped. The store went still. Completely still. For a moment, it felt like I had won. Like the decision had held. Like it mattered. Then, a sound. Soft. Close. The faintest hiss. I looked down. The tab on the can had lifted. Not fully. Just enough. A thin line of pressure escaping. A whisper of air. I hadn't pulled it. I knew I hadn't. My fingers were still wrapped around the sides, nowhere near the tab. But it had moved. The hiss grew slightly louder. A slow release. I felt something drop in my stomach. No, I said. The word came out hollow. The tab lifted a fraction more. The seal strained. I tightened my grip, as if that could stop it. I didn't choose that, I said. The store didn't respond. Or maybe it did, because the lights brightened suddenly. Not fully. Just enough to reveal the aisles behind me. Empty. Completely empty now. No products. No shelves. Just long, bare corridors stretching into shadow. I stood alone with the machine. With the can. With the choice. The hiss stopped. The tab rested halfway open. Waiting. I stared at it. My heart pounded in my ears. I'm not opening it, I whispered. The words felt weak now. Uncertain. The can was still in my hand. The tab was already lifted. Something had begun. Whether I wanted it or not. I could finish it. Or I could. What? Pretend it hadn't started. The store waited. The machine hummed softly. Patient. I closed my eyes for a moment. Then, I made a decision. My finger hooked under the tab. I pulled. The seal broke with a sharp, final crack. The sound echoed through the empty store, louder than it should have been. The hiss followed immediately, a rush of pressure releasing. Cold vapor brushed against my hand. I opened my eyes. The store was normal. The shelves were back. The products restored. The lights steady. The hum consistent. The doors at the front slid open with a soft chime. Outside, the night looked ordinary. Unremarkable. I stood there, the open can in my hand, condensation dripping onto the floor. For a moment, nothing else happened. Then, from somewhere behind me, the soda machine whirred. I turned slowly. Another can rolled forward. It settled gently into the tray. Soft. Deliberate. Like before. I stared at it. The label was clear. Simple. Unchanged. Your last choice. I looked down at the can in my hand. Then back at the machine. The doors at the front remained open. Waiting. I took a step toward them. Behind me, the machine hummed quietly. Patient. Attentive. As if it already knew. Whatever I did next had never really been up to me.